Hey everyone, Jack here. And today we're going to be talking about villains in D&D. So, what makes a good villain for your D&D campaign? Well, I think what makes a good villain is a villain who is very consistent in what they're trying to do. And the way you get to making consistent villains is you have them following a set plan that you have laid out before the players have even come to the table. So, don't just have a bad guy who comes to the town, kills some people, kidnaps them, and maybe is taking people for some sacrifice. You should have what the villain was planning to do before the heroes came along, laid out before the campaign actually starts. So let's say that you have a villain who your original plan was to have them sacrificing a couple of the townspeople, and the heroes are going to go and save the townspeople from being sacrificed, and then they're going to become the heroes of the village. Well, a good way to actually plan this villain is to figure out why they want to sacrifice the villagers and figure out what their end goals are. Because without having end goals, you may end up in a situation where the players have somehow subdued someone or have maybe gotten to the villain's lair and are investigating and trying to figure out why the villain is doing this. Not just where the villain is doing it and how the villain is doing it, but actually why. And when they start looking into why the villain is doing this and you don't have a clear answer, it kind of erodes away at the verisimilitude of the game. And even just having a very simple idea like he's sacrificing these people to summon his old god, that is enough to maybe improvise some more information when the players start investigating the villain's lair. Laying out the villain's plan also allows it so that if the heroes decide to actually not do anything in your story for a while, you can ratchet up the tension by having the villain's plan move forward very slightly. You can do this by actually having laid out a couple broad steps on what the villain's step-by-step plan is. So you don't have to have every individual step like, oh, the villain's going to go here, then there, and all that. You can just have like general ideas like he's going to kidnap the villagers. Then he is going to go to this location and pray to his god, or then he is going to kidnap this villager, and so on and so forth. Just a couple small events that the villain has planned in his larger plan that you can use to slowly ratchet up the tension. So if the players decide to go on a mushroom collecting quest for 2 sessions in a row, then if you want to get them back on track, you can just have it so the villain goes and kidnaps another person or has whatever the next step in their plan is happen. Designing villains that also tie into the players' backstories and the player's character development thus far also helps to cement the idea that the villain is a real living, breathing being within your world. So you might want to find a way to tie your players' backstories into the villain's backstory. Maybe the fighter has a backstory of being raised at a fighting college that taught him the ways of their martial art or whatever. And then you can have it so that the villain is maybe a character who was from the college or something like that. And then that would make the player feel like the villain existed long before they came into the picture, and that the villain has been existing and coming up with these plans before the game even started. Villain design is a very important part of making the villain fun, but you also need to have level appropriate encounters with the villain as well as level appropriate encounters with the villain's henchmen. So making sure that the villain isn't too high level for the players is a very important thing when coming up with the villain. Obviously, when the players start the adventure, you're going to want them to be lower level than the villain because they have to do something. They have to put in some work to get to the villain, because if they were able to just go straight to killing the villain or subduing the villain in some way, then it would feel less rewarding than having to spend a couple sessions actually doing stuff to get there. But it's very important to remember that if you make the villain too far away, like let's say you introduce the villain at first level and they aren't able to fight the villain until 15th level, then it may feel less rewarding because the players may either give up completely and the campaign may stop, or by the time they get there, they feel like they've slogged through so much unnecessary garbage. And when they finally do kill them, it's like, oh, we've stopped one problem of the many of this world, and we haven't really made a larger impact. So I've found that if you want to have a villain who is substantially higher level than the actual players when you're starting the campaign, the best way to do that is to have layered villains. So what a layered villain would entail is you'd have almost a mini boss in between every couple of levels. So let's say you want that 15th level boss, but your players are only first level. Then maybe it would be reasonable to have a couple bosses, maybe like one at 5th level, one at 8th level, one at 12th level, and so on. And, that makes them feel like they're actually making an impact and they aren't just having to go and like kill a bunch of goblins to level up. You can do this in a very clever way where instead of just introducing that 15th level villain when they're first level by having the villain come to the town and just burn it all down, you can have the 5th level, or maybe if you want the 8th level boss, come to the town and light it on fire. And this sets the player's goal a little lower, even though they're not going to be fighting the main boss for quite a while, and maybe they don't even know the main boss exists, they just know this lower boss. When they finally do defeat that 8th level boss, they will find like some communications to the higher level boss, and then this will make it feel less like, oh, we haven't done anything. They'll feel like, oh, we've saved the town, but now the local area is threatened by this 15th level boss. You can do this as long as you want. You can have a 2nd level boss, then you can have a 5th level, then a 8th level, and you can just keep going. And that's how a campaign could work. You could just have one series of bosses who are all layered antagonists, each connected to the last. The 2nd level boss is technically a lieutenant for the 5th level boss. The 5th level boss is just a smaller army for the 7th level boss, and so on. And then when they finally get to 15th level and they defeat that big final bad evil guy who is, rather than threatening just the local area, is threatening the entire world, and they see that all of these problems have all actually been interconnected, they're going to feel way more satisfied than if there was just one boss at 15th level and then a bunch of nameless thugs in between them and him. I've talked about it a little already, but let's talk about it more in depth. I think it's a very important thing to show the main bad guy, or even just one of the sub-bosses, to the players when they're at a lower level. You don't have to have it so that they get into a direct conflict, and I would actually recommend you avoid getting them into a direct conflict, because if you're doing it the typical way, the boss is going to be a little higher level in the party, and if the boss gets into direct conflict with the party when they first start adventuring, most likely they're going to just destroy them. And if they don't destroy them and the player destroys them, then you've just wasted a bunch of prep and planning for a boss that will never actually come to fruition. So you want to have it so that they see the bad guy, but they don't actually have to fight the bad guy. And you can do this one of two ways. So you can either do it where the main boss feels as if the players are beneath him and decides not to kill them just because he wants to show people that he doesn't need to kill these adventurers because he's that much better than them. Or you can do it in a way where they see the aftermath of what the boss has been doing to the world. You could set it up so that they come into the town right after the villain has left and they see the charred remains of a couple of their favorite NPCs, or maybe a couple of the townsfolk just burning in the town center. And then they go around and they ask what's happened, and people describe how this villain has come in and destroyed the town. Or maybe they can even see the remnants of a couple of his minions doing some of the cleanup work that he has sent them to do, such as killing a couple last people or stealing a couple of things. And then the party might get to have an interaction with those minions and fight them, and they'll see the power of the main boss, where he like threw a fireball and it burnt down the tavern, or he cast a spell that called lightning right into the center of the town and charred the trees. It's all up to you what you want to do and how you want to show the boss's power, but I think it's very important that you show that the villain does villainous things. I think that if you don't show the players the villain doing bad things early on, they're not going to feel as motivated to fight them, and they're just going to feel more obligated to do it. Because if the NPCs are like, oh, there's this bad guy in the town and he's like harassing us, oh no, like, yes, they'll do it because it's a game and they know that's what you're trying to set them up to do, but they won't feel motivated to do it. And you want them to feel motivated to go and fight the boss, because the more motivated they feel, the more fun they're going to have, and the more fun they're going to have defeating the boss. And having fun is what this game is all about. And I'm just trying to give you different ways to increase that fun you can have at the table. Other than just the direct impact of a villain attacking or the aftermath of a villain attack, you're going to want to show the impact that the villain has on the world or local area that you're playing in. So you might want to show that people are afraid to mention their name, or they are scared of going out late at night to a certain part of the woods because they know the villain is lurking there, or maybe the minions of the villain are there, and so they're afraid to walk around that area. Showing the villain having a direct impact on the NPCs that the players care about will make the players feel motivated to go and attack the villain. Because if their favorite barkeep or their favorite store owner is having their life negatively impacted by this villain's existence, then they're going to want to help the characters that they have developed a bond with. And so they're going to feel more motivated and rewarded when they finally defeat the boss. We've been talking a lot about the defeat of the boss, so let's get into what you should be doing when that eventually does happen. In a good adventure, the players are going to feel very happy when they defeat the boss, and you're going to want to show how the town feels about them or how the local area feels about them. Maybe have a key NPC come up to them and be like, "Thank you so much, you've saved our town," things like that. And that's the pretty general stuff that most people know they should be doing, and giving the players a little pat on the back, showing them that people like what they've done. But an important part that a lot of people miss is the little details. So maybe the villain was blocking trade from a neighboring kingdom, and the players hadn't really noticed that up until now. They've been able to get some of the stuff they needed, and obviously maybe some things were out of stock in the general store. But now that the villain's gone, maybe some new stuff can actually end up in the general store, and the general store owner will come up to the adventurers and be like, "Oh, thank you so much for defeating the BBEG. You have allowed us to get all these new cool wares. Would you like to have a discount on them because of your assistance?" And it's all these little things that make the players feel really good about what they've done. They're playing this game because they want to feel like heroes, so you want to make them feel like heroes. And heroes do have big impacts on the world, and the high noble people are going to come and thank them and maybe even give them a medal like in Star Wars. But it's a lot of the little things from the common folk in the town that are going to motivate them to keep going. So have that baker come up to them and thank them, and have the tavern keep talk about how they can get new ale because of what they've done. It's just tiny things like that that will make them really feel like heroes. Oh, and one thing I forgot to talk about is when you're looking at the plan that you have laid out for the villain, you should be willing to adapt and change it depending on what the players do. Don't have the villain just rigidly stick to that plan that you laid out before the campaign even began, because then it's going to be really easy for the players to figure out what that plan is and stop it. And if he doesn't change it, then you're not going to know what the villain does next, and then he's just going to sit there kind of stagnant waiting for the heroes to kind of finish him off. Because of that, there's going to be a gap between when the heroes actually win and when the game concludes. And that's never really fun, because then it's just a bunch of slugging through minions and then eventually getting to a big fight, but the fight really isn't for any particular reason because the heroes have already stopped their plan. Whereas if you have a villain who is willing to adapt and change their plan on the fly, it's going to make them look really intelligent, and it's going to make the heroes think, wow, this guy's a real living person who can change their plan, and they're going to have to experience way less slog. It's going to make the campaign just that much more fun. Plus, when the characters in your game act intelligently rather than just mindless entities that wander around the world, it really sells the idea that this is a living, breathing world. It's all going back to this idea of verisimilitude and making the campaign world seem real, rather than just having a stagnant world that the players are plopped into and are moving around. It's what really separates D&D and other TTRPGs from video games. I like video games, but what makes D&D and games like this special is the ability for the dungeon master to change plans on the fly and react to the players' interactions with the world. So have the villains change their plan depending on what the characters do. Have them kidnap a different person if the players are able to protect someone, or have them lash out and attack the entire village if the players are stopping them from getting their plan done. Overall, this all creates a feeling that the villains are real and living people, after you've given them the idea of being a living, breathing person, you're going to want to give them a couple quirks, some memorable features that make them separate from other villains. Because a lot of villains in D&D campaigns end up doing very repetitive things, very similar things to one another, just on different scales, like kidnapping a couple people from the village, kidnapping thousands of people from the world, trying to get this object, trying to get a bigger, cooler object. So you're going to want to spice up the individual villains. Obviously, you're not going to want to go overboard and make their whole personality that they have 2 peg legs and 2 peg arms and they speak like a rich 18th century man. But giving them unique and interesting quirks and flaws does make them feel more interesting than just the average villain. So what I would recommend is giving them just like 1 or maybe 2 interesting character quirks or flaws, and have that influence their decisions and how they behave. It will really add this extra level to your villains that won't be present in a lot of other people's campaigns, and it will make it so that your players always talk about your campaigns and are always having fun when they're playing with you, because you have the villains who always have just interesting personalities and interesting quirks and stuff like that, and it makes them just that much more enjoyable. So I think that's all I have for today, folks. If you have a interesting villain that you have run, or have had an interesting villain in a campaign that you've played in, leave that down in the comments below. I'd like to read them. Maybe I'll steal some of them and put them in my home campaigns. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, could you leave it a like? That'd be great. And if you're interested in seeing more content like this, you can hit the subscribe button and be notified of any future content that I put out. Thanks for stopping by, folks. I hope you have a great day, week, month, and year.